Yes, you say goodbye. See you guys.
Hello.
Hello, John. Fran Kelly, how are you? Nice to meet you.
Do you say your name again?
Fran Kelly.
Oh, Fran.
Yes.
I thought you said Frank Ellie.
No, well, I often get letters addressed like that. No, you're going to be in this one.
Oh, that one. Oh, thank you. You got me up a few
Yeah,
inches.
we've
Got you
just
sorted?
notched you up. Just to let you know, so you've got about 15 minutes for this interview, and it'll run for about 10 to 12 minutes on air.
Okay.
So yeah.
And I'll let Louis. This is Louis. He's going to make you up.
Good, isn't that lovely?
This is Roy over here on the camera, and this is Stephen.
It's just for our web. Hi, John.
Hello. So we are shooting it, although it's radio.
It's radio, and if it's okay with you, we just shoot it for our website.
Right. Yes, I always think when you do radio, you're going to get rid of the cameras for a few minutes.
Well, that
and
used to be.
everyone has a
Now we're
website.
living in a whole new world, you know.
That's right.
You tell me when we're ready to go.
Okay, I'm rolling.
All right, and I'm just going to say we won't bother with any introduction. I'll just say hello and
Yeah,
on we go.
okay.
John Cleese, welcome to Radio National Breakfast.
Thanks for having me.
Here we are in the Opera House, an iconic venue in Australia, talking to an icon of comedy, because I think there's no doubt that's how you're regarded here. Welcome to Australia.
That's the word this decade, yes. Icon. You didn't hear it when I was young, you know? Nobody said it. An icon meant a Russian religious painting until about 30 years ago, and then suddenly. But you're right, Python got some kind of very special status, and then Fawlty Towers did too, and it's unusual to do it twice.
And both those things, Monty Python and Fawlty Tower, attracted millions and millions of fans here in Australia. In fact, on the way here, someone said to me, someone said to someone in the car, are you a fan of John Cleese? And he said, who's not? And that's how it is here. But this is your first live comedy performance in Australia.
You're quite right. And it's a matter of coincidence. First of all, when I was doing a show in the West End in '63, and that was the show that got me into show business, I was going to be a lawyer. But I took part in a little review that was done in the Professional Theatre in Cambridge that year. And suddenly there were lots of people in suits in the Footlights Club room, and the next thing is we ran the West End for 5 months, and then we had a little bit of a break, and somebody said, would you like to tour New Zealand? And of course we were 23, 24, we said, of course we want to do it. And then I didn't really do any stage work except for the Python stage shows and Amnesty International, which I'm proud I more or less started that. But otherwise I was never on stage, and people sometimes ask me if I wanted to do it, and the truth was I didn't really want to say the same things every night for 6 months. It didn't interest me because I'm really a writer who happens to perform. And then then I was asked back in 2005 to go to New Zealand again. And at that time I was having fights with Hollywood studios, and they were telling me to do things to scripts I'd written that I knew were wrong. And I found it very frustrating when somebody says, do that, and you know it's wrong. You say, well, how do I get it right if I think it's wrong? You know, do I make it even worse so that you think it's better? I mean, there's no parameters. So somebody rang up and said, would John like to come to New Zealand? They'd no idea I'd been there 40 years before, so I did that. And that suddenly meant I had a stage show, and that meant that I had another source of income. And as the films are beginning, as you know, to fade away in America, it's much harder to get film parts than it was. And as you know, television is now being replaced, written comedies being replaced by these dreadful, what do they call it, reality television programs. Then to have this as another way of earning income has proved absolutely invaluable. So I did twice up and down the west coast of America, twice in Scandinavia. Now I'm delighted to say Australia in the new year.
And this is what's known as the Alimony Tour, is that right? Is that the show?
Well, yeah, so we may not call it that anymore. I thought it was a funny joke to start with. We might change it. But the main thing is it's 2 hours in which I come out to talk a little bit about my life and basically try and make people laugh.
So we'll get snippets of this on Saturday night as you host the gala night, the comedy gala night at the Just for Laughs Festival.
Yeah.
And as you say, most of us here in Australia know you only from the big or small screen. How do you feel about stand-up comedy?
Well, I feel very comfortable about it, but when I started, it was more sketch comedy, you see. It was in the tradition of Peter Cook. So I was used to going out with 1 or 2 people and doing a sketch. Now it's become, the stand-up comedian has suddenly become a bit like a rock star, but that's in my life, that's relatively recent development.
Do you enjoy that direct feedback with the audience?
Love the contact with the audience, yes, because you see, if you make a movie, you think of an idea and you think, that's funny. 2.5 years later, Fran, 2.5 years later, you discover whether the audience laughs at it or not. And even on television, when we used to do Monty Python, we'd do a show, the studio audience might laugh or might not laugh because sometimes they didn't know where to look, so sometimes it wasn't an indicator of whether it was funny. And then you'd go out the next day, nobody seemed to have seen it. But when you're in the theatre and you do something, either it works or it doesn't work. And when it works, it's lovely to make people laugh.
So does that mean there's a lot of tweaking, rewriting, reacting going on? And will you be, for instance, redesigning bits of it for this Australian
absolutely.
performance?
I mean, first of all, before I come back, and I think I start in Perth on late January, 24th, I think it is, and then I go all the way. I do all the obvious places, and also I'm doing Newcastle, Gold Coast, and then I finish up in
with
Canberra.
a John Cleese stand-up.
Yeah. But first of all, I have to go to South Africa. So I'm redoing the show for South Africa. And when I come to Australia, I may just say, I'm bored with that. I'll try something completely different. So I don't actually know what I'm going to be doing in Australia, but most of it will be funny.
On Saturday night, are we getting any new material?
You're getting something that I did in Montreal 2 years ago, which no one will have seen. We've rewritten that, but it was a good basic thing. And when you come a very long way and then you put a team together and you only got a few days to rehearse, you want to make sure that that material is pretty solid before you start rehearsing it. It gets a bit frantic if you have to start rewriting late at night. So I was so happy with a couple of the pieces that I did in Montreal 2 years ago that I said, let's rewrite them and make them more Australian, and let's do that. So yes, I'll be on stage introducing the comics, and Just for Laughs has a policy that don't tell people what they're going to see because it's more fun. They don't have an expectation, so I'm not going to tell you who's in the show Saturday night, but I'll be on at the beginning, and then I come on and do 2 set pieces, and as well as introducing the other comics, some of whom are Australian, some of whom are international.
The comedy business, it's all about laughs, it's all about fun, yet I've heard you describe it in the past as no romp. It takes great effort. You've been doing it, as you say, since university days. How hard is it as a career to be a comedy writer and performer as well?
Well, I think I was always lucky. I mean this quite sincerely. That at the beginning, I realized that getting comedy right was a lot harder than a lot of the people that I worked with thought it was. Do you see what I mean? And I realized it's about precision. I mean, very little of excellence has ever been produced without precision. And if you work hard at something and really figure out how to make it work and get it as precise as possible, then that becomes more work than just fooling around having a good time. Yeah, and there are some people who go on and wing it, and sometimes they're wonderful, but sometimes they're not so good. You're relying a little bit more on the spirit of the night, and I like to get it like a writer. As I say, I'm a writer. I like to get it as precise as possible and then try to recapture the freshness every night, and the audience is the key to that. If the audience is a good audience, it always fills you with this almost joyous energy and you enjoy it. If the audience is a bit slow, there's a little bit of it that goes, oh well, I'll do it as well as I can. And then very frequently in the end you get just as good a reception as you did from the livelier audience the previous night. Every audience has a way of enjoying it.
What about, if you were lucky to have those realizations early on about the craft, you were lucky too with the blokes you ended up or began working with. The Frost Report, it was an incredible who's who. Tim Brooke-Taylor, Frank Muir, Marty Feldman, Ronnie Barker, Ronnie Corbett, the future Python crew,
and
Eric
great
Idle.
Writers like
Michael Palin.
Jonesy was there. Everyone from Python except for Terry Gilliam, who hadn't arrived from America yet.
I mean, it's an incredible start to your
career. Yeah, but also
career,
working with people like David Nobbs, wrote Reggie Perrin, and Tinniswood and Cryer and Vosborough. They were just a terrific bunch of writers, and they all went on to achieve things in their different fields. And I realized at the beginning that there was and Marty Feldman, he was a script editor on the Frost Report, and they all taught me something. And I started out trying to do good sketches, and then finally I thought, well, 3, 4, 5 minutes, I can do that pretty well now. I'd like to try and do a good half hour. And then I did that with Fawlty Towers, and then I thought, well, now I must try to do an hour and a half, because doing an hour and a half is more than 3 times harder than doing half an hour. Do you see what I mean? Because you can make an audience laugh for half an hour, but not, you can't make them laugh the whole of 90 minutes. You have to give them little breaks and sort of bring the pace down a little bit and then become funny again. So it's a kind of, it's like a graph. It goes up and down a little bit. It's got to keep building, but there have to be peaks and troughs, and that's a much harder art, which is why if you think of comedy since, say, 1945, the end of the war, you'd very, very hard put to come up with more than 15 or 20 absolutely wonderful comedies. A lot of comedies are funny, but in patches. You know, they're uneven. But you can probably think of 15 or 20 great comedies. You can probably do 200 great dramas. It's much harder than drama.
What's interesting about your work and those great works, if you mentioned Fawlty Tower, the Monty Python series, collaborative. It was about teams, and so were others. The Goodies were a team, the Young Ones were a team.
Yeah.
It was all groups of writers. This was a formative, must have been an excitable period.
Oh, it was tremendous fun,
comedy.
and we'd always write in pairs. We never wrote with the whole group because there was always someone who wouldn't like what had just been suggested. But it was a great discipline, sitting down and reading the pieces out. We used to get together about every 7 or 8 working days, and we would read the stuff out. And of course you had not only a very good audience, because if it was funny they laughed, and if it wasn't funny they didn't, but you had the most expert people who were able to say, you know, it works from the moment that you start there, they're talking about that, it's suddenly really funny up to there. So then someone else would say, well, can I rewrite it? And then they would come up keeping the good bit, but keeping a different introduction, bringing in a different introduction, and then developing it differently. So
That's a very generous experience, isn't it?
Yeah, it was lovely. And as a result, it's quite difficult some of the times to actually remember who wrote the sketch. Like the Four Yorkshiremen, which finished up in the Python stage show, originally was written, I think, by Marty and Tim Brooke Taylor for a show called the 1948 show, which Graham Chapman and I then rewrote. We did it on that show, which was only ever transmitted once, and then I once remembered it, and we did it in the Amnesty concert. And then I suggested we should put it in the Python stage show. It had quite a long history.
You wrote a lot with this fellow Graham Chapman.
Yes.
You wrote with him from Cambridge right the way through.
And I talk about Graham a lot in the stage show, in my stage show.
Just humour me, the Dead Parrot sketch. Was there anything that comes to mind about the writing of that sketch?
Oh yeah.
And does that get revived?
Well, some of the sketches have interesting stories to them, and that one was that when I first married Connie and got back to England in '68, Frost said, "Would you like to do a show?" And of course, I was thrilled, and I said yes, and I did a show called How to Irritate People. And Graham Chapman and I wrote a sketch about a second-hand car salesman that was based on a guy in a garage that Michael Palin used to have dealings with. Michael would come in, there'd be something wrong with the car, and the guy would say, well, Mr. Palin, you know, sticky gearbox is always a sign of a top-class car. You expect that for the first couple of thousand miles, but you have any problems, bring it in. And Michael would say, well, I am having problems, and I have brought it in. He said, yeah, well, I mean, you know, you have any problems, bring it in. And we did this second-hand car salesman. It was only ever seen by about 7 people, that show. And then, it's now out on DVD, but at the time. And then when we sat down to write Python, I read this sketch. I said to Gray, this is a funny interaction, but I said, the second-hand car is a cliche. And then we talked about it, and somebody, Gray or I, said, well, what about doing it in a pet shop? And then we started to laugh. And we said, was it a dog or a parrot? I remember we discussed for some time, is it funnier with a dog? No, it's funnier with a parrot. So we then rewrote the whole second-hand car sketch with the parrot as the car, as it were. And that was where the parrot sketch came from.
And do you ever still do the parrot sketch?
The last time I did it was on Saturday Night Live in the United States of America when we were publicizing Fierce Creatures, I think. And they were so keen we should do it. And we said, oh, do people really want to see that again? Both Michael and I didn't really want to do it. They said, oh, please do it. It's iconic. And we sat down in a restaurant the previous night to remember. We couldn't remember the lines. And what was so funny is we knew we could have gone out onto the pavement in New York and stopped almost any young person.
And they could tell you the
could have told
lines.
us what it was.
And does that tire you or thrill you? The fact that people still, when you say John Cleese, they still think Silly Walks, or they still think Faulty Towers, or Monty Python.
I think the only aspect of that I could sometimes ask to be slightly different is the assumption that I am one of the characters that I've played. Because when they say, well, all your characters are angry, I say, well, do you remember a film called Fish Called Wanda that got 3 Oscar nominations? Would you have called Archie angry? Oh, they say, oh, no, not really. And I said, was the Minister of Silly Walks angry? Oh, no. And they suddenly realize that they've taken a small part of your work and generalized from it. But otherwise, when people say, thanks for making me laugh, it always makes me feel great.
Speaking of people having set ideas of you've made California your home, and
well, I have, but I'm about to move out of California now. I've been there for long enough. I used to find that 80% of my work was in America. Now it's 20%. Last year, the main money that I earned was in Scandinavia and South Africa.
So where are you moving to?
Well, it's a very strange thing to say to you, but I suddenly realized I don't want to be in America. I can't go back to England because they won't let me charge the alimony, which is $1 million a year, against income. So that means I would have to earn $2 million of income before I could keep a penny, and I can't start $2 million behind the black ball. So I've been looking about whether to go to Switzerland or Monaco, but somewhere in Europe certainly, and somewhere where the weather's good.
I was just wondering about how, the bloke who many of us think is a fairly quintessential, albeit very funny Englishman, found living in California, making a home outside of England.
I loved it because I find the English climate very depressing. I really do. I'm one of those SAD people, I think everybody's SAD. Who isn't cheered up in the morning by a bit of sunshine? But struggling through the English winter was always a real problem for me from about October through to maybe early April. So being in Santa Barbara, which was way out of LA, which I can't stand, there were 300 days of sunshine a year. It was a lovely little town. It was a pretty town. It was a friendly town. And as I say, most of my work was in America, so I only had to pop on a domestic flight, go and do a job, and I could come back again. That suited me very well, but parts of California are the very best end of America. You've got to remember that America's so many different places depending on where you are.
Were you engaged in the political debate in America? And I wonder what you think of it. We were speaking recently on the program to novelist Jonathan Franzen, who talked about the great political divide, the political rage. Were you aware of that?
Oh, yes. I mean, very shortly after I got, George W. Bush was elected. And every single one of my friends was depressed for quite a long time. We hated the direction that the country was taking. We particularly hated almost everything that Dick Cheney did, who's now trying to come out with his new book sort of showing how right he was about it. Cheney was the one who said there's no such thing as a deficit. Deficit doesn't matter, he said. Deficits don't matter, and now it's in the worst mess it's ever been economically because of the deficit. So you had someone in charge who had no idea what he was doing. It was such a powerful personality. I think he'd started off very competent, and I think all the heart surgery and all the medicine that he'd been taking over the years simply changed his mindset, and he was an awful creature to be in charge of a first world country, and he was basically running a lot of it, especially the foreign policy in the early days. So it was very, very depressing to be in America.
Now you have the Tea Party.
Well, that's right, but then when Obama actually got elected, then, sorry, I'm distracted by people going out of doors.
I think they're winding us up. That's
right. That's right. Let me just finish.
Yeah.
I'll pick that up again. So when
Obama got elected.
Well, when Obama got elected, I thought, wonderful. Now maybe he can bring America together. And what I realized is that the Republicans who are in charge, not the decent Republicans, but the Republicans who are in charge of the Republican Party at the moment, aren't interested in being brought together with the Democrats. And when I realized that, I thought, I have to get out of here.
Time to leave California.
Time to leave
America.
California. And 80% of the work is the other side of the Atlantic now, so it wasn't a difficult decision.
Well, it's tremendous to have you down here in Australia, and we look forward to you this weekend and when you come back. Thanks so much for joining us on Breakfast.
I come back for 3 months.
John Cleese, hopefully we can talk to you again then.
Good,
Thank
I
you.
hope so. But it's depressing, America.
Yeah, that's
and the Eurozone isn't exactly...
Well, I was going to ask you about Britain and the riots and stuff, but I think they're winding us down.